in your repertoire of things. This isn't what I wanted it to be, but this is what I say, don't fuss, right?
Stop. No way to stop.
Anyway, I'm going to move on from this very quickly to a pitcher form. And I've always had pitchers as part of my pottery making until probably 15 years ago, when I let them go away. And then I came back to them, but there's a couple reasons why I did, I think. But what I want to point out about it is that, and I think I'm sitting here trying to think at the same time, it's on one of the bats that doesn't fit this wheel, so. There is a very traditional method of making pots. Jugtown potters on bigger forms. A lot of what you see is these really nice large-scale jugs were actually made in two pieces. And I oftentimes have my beginning students stack wet cylinders, and it is a method for making a bigger pot out of less clay. What they would do for the large jugs, what they would start off with, say, with 25 pounds of clay on the wheel. They would very quickly throw half of it into a quick cylinder. They'd set it aside. They'd go down and throw the bottom half of it and throw it up, still keeping it fairly cylindrical. Put the original cylinder on top of that, work them together, and then continue throwing. And what it does is it means that you're not sitting there working at the very bottom trying to lift all of that clay up. You're only trying to lift half of the clay up. And then when you stack the second cylinder on, then you end up basically with a much bigger pot. It isn't easily done the first time. It's something to practice, and it's something to practice at a scale that you're really comfortable with. Don't just turn around and say, I'm going to make a bigger pot. I was at Mount Hood a decade ago and came in during a lab time, and there were 3 women trying to throw, had to throw an 8-inch cylinder for one of the other instructors as a requirement of their throwing skills. And they were struggling. And this is getting down to the end of the term. And I came in just, you know, and I looked at what they were doing, and I sat them all down and I showed them how to, you know, they were comfortable with a 4-inch cylinder. There's an answer here. And so they very quickly found themselves with these really nice 8-inch cylinders. But there are lots of places in doing that where thinking about pots in sections, thinking about pots in parts is really the best solution. I have been throwing pitchers for a long time. We used to joke, Pat Worsley and I, who I shared the studio with, that we made three sizes of pitchers all out of the same weight of clay. And so everybody thinking real hard on this one. Anyway, you eventually realize that, yeah, you want to make this larger pitcher form, and you can sit there and you can really work hard at it, or you can make it really simple on yourself. And gotta get this stuck, sort of stuck, semi-stuck. So I am back to making some pitcher forms, and it was very flukish. I had left really what I would consider really utilitarian pieces. Not that all pots aren't utilitarian or functional, but the real pots of dynamic use, I had pretty much eliminate a lot of pieces. I was still making teapots and mugs for whatever reason. I'm still making too many mugs, but that's an economic concern right now. But some things had slid away, and I decided to make a picture form as a vehicle for talking to students about.
I thought it was going to jump off.
As a way of talking about making pots and parts. And anyway, so I made a picture. And it went through the process, and I soda fired it, and I put it out in the gallery. And Marriott Hotels all of a sudden gave me an order for like 60 of them. And it was like, oh. So all of a sudden I'm back into making these pictures. And it's actually put me into a mindset where I'm going to return to making some pieces I haven't made in a long time that I would say are far more utilitarian than many of the pieces I've been making. Anyway, so I've been trying to wrestle with the idea. These are big pictures, by the way. This is thrown out of about 4 pounds. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. And the neck is going to be just a little more than 2 pounds. And this is ends up being a very, very large scale pot for a 6 pound pot. And more than anything else, it's just easier. More simply done. I can focus on this part as one part of it, and then focus on the other part as a second step. There is also something really nice that happens, and I will talk about it as I do this. But oftentimes when you take clay through that curve, you thicken clay where you don't want it to be thickened and that sort of thing, and this helps alleviate that. I'm going to get to that right now. Anyway, so I made all of these pictures. It was, anytime you have an order for a great number, then you make about 20 more, so then all of a sudden you're in the picture business. And I've decided that what these large pictures really are, these pictures are vases for people who can't buy a vase. They can somehow reconcile buying a picture because it's a useful object. It never will be used as a picture.
I have one of your pictures that I'm using as a vase. But really because my daughter almost lost her life when she broke the spout on it. And I glued it all back together again because I could not give it up. And I'm using it as a vase because it doesn't have the strength for a picture anymore. But you mentioned your things are so functional, but they've been a real part of my family's life. I have several of the casseroles, and they show up, you know,
See, and that's
at least
cool.
once a week or so.
One of those kind?
And I wondered about the clay because it bakes very well. You know, I have some pieces that, you know, I'm not really sure it's going to the result.
That's the characteristic that I formulated into my clay. I was willing to sacrifice an awful lot for the ovenware aspect. There are a couple things that I did to the clay body, and you know, this is, you know, throwing it out. I have some kaolin in it because I think kaolin makes clay re-wet better if you have to re-wet clay. I think it and that was a characteristic I liked. One of the things that was surprisingly interesting way back when Bennett and I were talking about clay bodies together, his formulation was very high in kaolin, and he actually did, because this person was my boss at Pacific Stone, where he was my employer. He eventually went back to being a studio potter, and he still was a production person. So he tested the clays not only on them as ovenware, but he tested them on how many pots he could get thrown in a day. And he consistently came up with more pots in a day out of the particular formulation that he chose. And which, you know, I would never have thought that way.
Wow.
Isn't it supposed to be perfect? I'm just going to put this together just very lightly right now. And then I'm going to cut it loose. And sometimes this is a little hard. I always, is it in the bead? Okay. I'm very, usually mention that I really put